The gunshot shattered the evening silence, sending a flock of startled birds into the darkening sky as Rachel Porter dropped to her knees beside the burning barn. Flames climbed the weathered wood like hungry demons, devouring everything in their path while she frantically dipped her bucket into the water trough. It wasn't supposed to end like this, not her father's legacy, not her last remaining connection to her family name, not on her 23rd birthday. Rachel had first spotted the flames from her kitchen window as she prepared her solitary supper. The orange glow flickering across the yard had sent her heart plummeting, and she'd raced outside without a second thought. Now, sweat streamed down her face, mixing with desperate tears as she hurled another pathetic splash of water against the inferno. "Get back!" The command came from behind her, the voice deep and unfamiliar. "You've done enough. Let me finish it." Rachel whirled around, nearly losing her footing on the trampled grass. A man she'd never seen before, dismounted from a magnificent chestnut stallion, his movements swift and confident. His face was partially shadowed by a wide-brimmed hat, but she could make out a strong jaw dusted with stubble and eyes that reflected the dancing flames. "Who are you?" she demanded, clutching her bucket protectively. "And what do you mean I've done enough? I haven't even started to save it." The stranger strode toward her, removing his leather gloves. "The name's Xavier Hunt, madam, and I meant no offense." His gaze shifted to the burning structure. "But that fire's too far gone for buckets. We need to contain it before it spreads to your house." Montana Territory, 1876, was no place for a woman alone, as folks in Whispering Pines never tired of reminding her. But Rachel had managed the Porter Ranch for 2 years since her father's passing, and she wasn't about to let some drifting cowboy tell her what to do on her own land. "I don't recall asking for your help, Mr. Hunt," Rachel said, refilling her bucket despite the futility of her efforts. Heat scorched her face as she moved closer to the barn, determined to salvage anything from the blaze. Xavier grabbed her arm, pulling her backward with surprising gentleness. "Madam, you're going to get yourself killed. That roof's about to collapse." As if summoned by his prediction, a deafening crack split the air. Rachel watched in horror as burning timbers crashed down where she had stood moments before. The force of the collapse sent sparks sailing toward the main house, landing on the dry wooden shingles of the porch roof. "My house!" Rachel cried, breaking free from Xavier's grip and racing toward the new danger. Xavier overtook her in 3 long strides. "Get your valuables and anything you can't replace," he instructed, grabbing her abandoned bucket. "I'll try to keep it contained until you're out." For once, Rachel didn't argue. She dashed into the small ranch house, heart pounding as she gathered the few precious items that defined her existence. Her mother's wedding ring, her father's pocket watch, the family Bible with generations of births and deaths carefully recorded, the portrait of her parents on their wedding day. The deed to the land. Outside, Xavier had organized an impressive defense with minimal resources. He'd moved his horse to safety, untethered her 2 workhorses from the smaller stable, and was now using her water pump with ruthless efficiency, directing streams onto the porch roof and the dry grass between the barn and house. Rachel emerged with a pillowcase of belongings just as 3 riders appeared on the road, shouting as they approached. "Fire at the Porter place!" one called out unnecessarily. Xavier immediately began shouting orders. "Johnson, take the south side. Miller, get those buckets from the well. You there? Yes, you start a fire break 10 feet from the house." Rachel stared in astonishment as the men, who had largely ignored her existence in town, except to offer insultingly low bids on her cattle, leaped to obey the commands of this stranger. For 2 exhausting hours, they battled the blaze. The barn was lost, but the house was saved, though the porch roof and one wall were badly scorched. By the time the danger had passed, Rachel was soot-covered and trembling with exhaustion. The neighbors departed with minimal conversation, leaving her alone with the mysterious cowboy who had taken charge so effectively. "Thank you," she said simply, too tired for pride. Xavier nodded, his face streaked with ash and sweat. In the moonlight, she could now see he was younger than she'd initially thought, perhaps 28 or 30, with eyes the color of a summer storm. "Any idea how it started, Miss Porter?" The formality of his address surprised her. "You know my name?" Hard not to in these parts. The woman who refuses to sell to Blackburn Enterprises is something of a local legend. A hint of admiration colored his tone. Rachel sighed, looking at the smoldering remains of her barn. I have my suspicions about the fire. Edmund Blackburn doesn't appreciate being refused, especially by a woman. You think Blackburn's men did this? Xavier's voice hardened. It wouldn't be the first time he's sent a message. Rachel pushed a strand of soot-stained hair from her face. But I can't prove anything. Xavier surveyed the damaged property thoughtfully. You can't stay here tonight. That east wall's unstable, and there might be hot spots we missed. I have nowhere else to go, Rachel admitted. The nearest neighbor was 3 miles away, and relations had grown strained as more locals sold their land to Blackburn's growing empire. I've got a camp set up by Silver Creek, about a half-mile west, Xavier offered. It's not much, but you're welcome to my tent. I can sleep under the stars. Rachel bristled at the impropriety of the suggestion, though she knew he meant well. That's kind, but unnecessary. I've slept rough before. I don't doubt it, Miss Porter. A ghost of a smile played across his lips. But there's rough, and then there's plain foolish. Your house could still catch fire if those embers reignite. Rachel considered her options and found them severely limited. Very well, Mr. Hunt, but I'll take the stars. You keep your tent. Dawn broke with merciful clarity, revealing the full extent of the damage to Rachel's property. The barn was nothing but charred beams and ash, the corral fence partially destroyed, and the eastern wall of her house was a blackened shell. But she was alive, and so were her horses, thanks to the quick action of a stranger who now sat across from her at his small campfire, brewing surprisingly decent coffee. You never did say what brings you to Whispering Pines, Rachel remarked, accepting the tin cup he offered. Xavier added another stick to the fire. Just passing through looking for work. Cowboy? Among other things. I've driven cattle, broken horses, mended fences. He took a sip of his coffee. Lately, I've been doing some scouting for the railroad. Rachel tensed. The railroad meant progress to some, but to small ranchers like her, it often meant trouble, more settlers, more fences, less open range. Blackburn's been trying to buy up land for the railroad, she said cautiously. Xavier's expression revealed nothing. I work for the Northern Pacific, not Blackburn. In these parts, there's little difference. Rachel stood, brushing dust from her skirt. I should get back, see what can be salvaged. They returned to find 3 men on horseback, examining the burned-out barn. Rachel recognized Edmund Blackburn's foreman, Seth Weller, and 2 of his ranch hands. Her hand instinctively moved to her father's revolver, tucked into her belt beneath her jacket. Miss Porter, Weller called, touching his hat with mock courtesy. Terrible accident you've had here. Nothing accidental about it, Weller, Rachel replied coolly. Xavier remained slightly behind her, his posture relaxed but watchful. Weller's gaze flicked to him with naked curiosity. Made a new friend, I see. Funny timing. State your business and move on, Rachel said. You're trespassing. Weller dismounted, approaching with the confidence of a man used to intimidation. Mr. Blackburn sent me to express his sympathies and to renew his offer for your property. He pulled a folded document from his vest pocket. In light of recent events, he's prepared to be generous. Rachel didn't bother looking at the paper. My answer hasn't changed. Be reasonable, woman. Weller's voice lost its veneer of civility. You can't run this place alone, especially now. Blackburn's offering fair market value. We both know that's a lie, Rachel countered. And I'm not alone. Weller laughed, a harsh sound without humor. This drifter? He jerked his chin toward Xavier. He'll be gone with tomorrow's wind. Take the money while it's still offered. Xavier stepped forward. The lady gave you her answer. Something in his quiet tone made Weller hesitate. He studied Xavier more carefully, recognition slowly dawning in his eyes. You look familiar, mister. Have we crossed paths before? I've got that kind of face, Xavier replied evenly. Now, as the lady said, you're trespassing. Tension crackled between them, like the remnants of last night's fire. After a long moment, Weller remounted his horse. This isn't over, Miss Porter. Accidents happen all the time in these parts. With a final glare, he and his men rode off, leaving a cloud of dust in their wake. Rachel released a breath she hadn't realized she was holding. "Thank you for backing me, but they'll be back." Xavier's expression had hardened, his eyes tracking the departing riders. "What's your plan now?" "Same as always. Rebuild, survive, keep what's mine." Rachel surveyed the damage with grim determination. "My father didn't die defending this land for me to give it up at the first sign of trouble." "Admirable, but practical?" Xavier questioned. "That barn won't rebuild itself, and winter's coming in a few months." Rachel rounded on him, frustration bubbling over. "What would you have me do? Surrender everything I've worked for? Everything my family built?" "I'd have you survive," Xavier replied simply. "There are other ways to fight, besides standing alone against the tide." His words struck something deep within her. For 2 years, Rachel had fought her battles in isolation, wearing solitude like armor. The possibility of another approach had never occurred to her. "I need to assess the damage to the house," she said, changing the subject. "You're welcome to be on your way, Mr. Hunt. I appreciate your help, but I don't expect you to involve yourself further in my troubles." Xavier surprised her with a slow smile that transformed his weather-beaten face. "I've got nowhere pressing to be, Miss Porter, and I'm pretty handy with a hammer." Against her better judgment, Rachel found herself returning his smile. "Are you offering to help rebuild my barn, Mr. Hunt?" "Let's start with making your house safe for the night," he suggested. "Then we can discuss terms for the barn." Over the next 3 days, Rachel discovered that Xavier Hunt was indeed handy with a hammer, and with nearly every other tool required to repair her damaged home. He worked from sunrise to sunset, speaking little but accomplishing much. By the 3rd evening, the eastern wall was structurally sound again, the damaged portion of roof replaced with fresh shingles, and the worst of the smoke damage scrubbed from the interior. Rachel found herself watching him when he wasn't looking, noting the easy strength in his movements and the quiet competence with which he approached each task. He wasn't like any drifter she'd encountered before. His speech was educated, his manner respectful without condescension, and occasionally she caught glimpses of a sharp wit beneath his reserved exterior. On the 4th morning, as they shared breakfast on her repaired porch, Rachel made a decision. "I'd like to hire you, Mr. Hunt," she announced, "to help rebuild the barn and stay on through the fall roundup. I can't pay much in cash, but I can offer room, board, and a share of the profits when we sell the cattle." Xavier considered her offer, his expression unreadable. "Why me? You could probably find cheaper help in town." "No one in town would work for me," Rachel admitted. "They're either afraid of crossing Blackburn, or they don't believe a woman can run a ranch. Besides, you've proven yourself capable, and you haven't tried to tell me what to do with my property." A smile tugged at the corner of his mouth. "Yet, is that a yes?" Xavier extended his hand. "It's a yes, Miss Porter, though I think, given the circumstances, you might call me Xavier." Rachel took his offered hand, noticing the strength in his grip and the calluses that spoke of years of hard work. "Then I'm Rachel." Their bargain struck. They set to planning the new barn. Xavier proved to have an eye for practical design, suggesting improvements to her father's original structure that would make it more efficient and easier to maintain. When they visited town for supplies, Rachel observed how differently she was treated with Xavier by her side. The shopkeepers who had previously overcharged her suddenly offered fair prices, and the sidelong glances from townspeople held more curiosity than contempt. At the lumber mill, they encountered Weller again, accompanied by a well-dressed man Rachel recognized as Edmund Blackburn himself. In his 50s, with silver-streaked dark hair and the prosperous look of a man used to getting his way, Blackburn dominated any space he entered. "Miss Porter," he greeted her with exaggerated courtesy. "I see you're rebuilding already." "Commendable spirit." "Mr. Blackburn," Rachel acknowledged stiffly. Blackburn's calculating gaze shifted to Xavier. "I don't believe we've been introduced." "Xavier Hunt," Xavier replied, offering no further information. A flicker of something recognition, perhaps, or concern crossed Blackburn's face before his smooth mask returned. "Mr. Hunt, new to our little community?" "Just passing through," Xavier said, his tone neutral but his posture alert. "Few people just pass through Whispering Pines, Mr. Hunt. We're rather off the main trails." Blackburn smiled, revealing 2 perfect teeth. What brings you to our remote corner of the territory? Work, Xavier answered simply. Rachel intervened before the uncomfortable exchange could continue. If you'll excuse us, Mr. Blackburn, we have supplies to purchase. Blackburn inclined his head graciously, but his eyes remained cold. Of course. But my offer still stands, Miss Porter. Should you reconsider your position, my door is always open. As they loaded lumber onto the wagon, Rachel noticed Xavier's unusually pensive mood. You're quiet, she observed. Just thinking, he replied, securing the last board. About Blackburn? Xavier helped her onto the wagon seat before climbing up beside her. About why a man like that wants your land so badly. Your ranch is good grazing country, but there's better to be had elsewhere. Rachel clicked to the horses, setting them in motion. I've wondered the same. My father always said our land was special, but he never elaborated. She hesitated, then added, there is one thing. The creek that runs through the northern section, it branches off underground somewhere in the foothills. There's a spring in the canyon that flows year-round, even in drought years. Water rights alone wouldn't explain Blackburn's persistence, Xavier mused. Unless what? Xavier shook his head. Just a thought. How well do you know your property, Rachel? All of it? Like the back of my hand, she replied proudly. Every ridge and gully, my father made sure of that. Would you show me? Tomorrow, perhaps? Rachel studied his expression, finding genuine interest there rather than the condescension she was accustomed to from men discussing her land. I'd like that, she said softly. They rode out at first light, Rachel leading Xavier through sun-dappled meadows where her small herd grazed, up rocky slopes covered with pine and juniper, and finally to the narrow canyon where the spring emerged from a cleft in the limestone wall. My father called this Heart Spring, Rachel explained as they dismounted, said it was the lifeblood of our land. She knelt beside the clear pool at the base of the rock face, dipping her fingers into the cool water. Xavier crouched beside her, studying the rock formation with unusual intensity. Your father was a smart man. He ran his hand along the stone surface where water trickled down. Did he ever mention finding anything unusual up here? Rocks that looked different, perhaps? Rachel gave him a quizzical look. Like what? Instead of answering, Xavier moved along the canyon wall, examining it closely. After several minutes, he stopped, focusing on a particular section where the limestone gave way to a darker stone. Rachel, come look at this. She joined him, following his gaze to what appeared to be streaks of dull gray embedded in the rock. What am I looking at? If I'm right, the reason Blackburn wants your land. Xavier scraped at the stone with his knife, revealing a metallic gleam beneath the weathered surface. Silver! Rachel stared in disbelief. That's impossible. If there was silver on our land, my father would have known. Maybe he did, Xavier suggested gently. Maybe that's why he fought so hard to keep it, and why he made sure you knew every inch of the property. The implications hit Rachel like a physical blow. If Xavier was right, her land was worth far more than she had ever imagined, and Blackburn's persistent attempts to acquire it suddenly made perfect sense. What do I do with this information? She whispered, feeling overwhelmed. Xavier straightened, his expression grave. That depends on what you want, Rachel. Mining claims are complex, and once word gets out, you'll have more trouble than just Blackburn to contend with. I don't want to be a miner, Rachel said firmly. I'm a rancher. This is my home, not just a piece of property to exploit. Then we keep this between us for now, Xavier advised, and we figure out how to protect what's yours through legal channels. Rachel nodded, grateful for his steady presence. Thank you for showing me this. Thank you for trusting me enough to bring me here, he replied, his voice warm with something more than mere appreciation. As they prepared to leave, Rachel found herself studying Xavier with new eyes. You know a lot about mining for a cowboy. A shadow crossed his face. I've had various occupations over the years. And one of them taught you to recognize silver ore on sight? Xavier mounted his horse before answering. Let's just say I learned some things the hard way. That night, as they sat on Rachel's porch watching the sunset paint the distant mountains, Xavier finally spoke of his past. He told her of growing up in Colorado, the son of a prospector who struck it rich only to lose everything to unscrupulous partners. How he'd educated himself through books while working every job the frontier offered. How he'd eventually become a mining consultant for the railroad, helping them identify promising routes based on mineral prospects. "So you weren't entirely honest about why you're here," Rachel observed, though there was no accusation in her tone. Xavier met her gaze directly. "The railroad sent me to survey the region, yes, but I wasn't looking for your land specifically, and I'm not here to take advantage of you, Rachel." "Then why help me? Why not report your findings to your employers?" "Because I've seen what happens to people like you when the mining companies move in." His voice held a bitter edge. "Good people get pushed aside, and land that sustained generations becomes nothing but a hole in the ground." Rachel considered this. "And yet, you work for the railroad that enables it all." "A man has to make a living," Xavier said quietly. "But that doesn't mean he can't have principles." "And what are your principles telling you now, Xavier Hunt?" He was silent for a long moment. "That some things matter more than a paycheck. That I don't want to be the man who destroys what you've built here." His honesty touched something in Rachel that had been dormant since her father's death, a capacity for trust she'd thought forever lost. "Thank you for telling me the truth." "I should have told you sooner," he admitted. "Yes, you should have." Rachel smiled to soften her words. "But I understand why you didn't." They sat together in companionable silence until the stars emerged, bright pinpoints against the vast Montana sky. When Rachel finally rose to go inside, Xavier caught her hand gently. "Whatever you decide to do about the silver, I'll help you," he promised. No strings attached. Rachel looked down at their joined hands, feeling the strange new warmth that spread through her at his touch. "I believe you," she said softly, and realized with some surprise that she truly did. The next morning brought unexpected visitors. Rachel was feeding the chickens when 3 riders approached Marshal Frank Wilcox from town, accompanied by 2 men she didn't recognize. Xavier emerged from the half-built barn, hammer in hand, as they dismounted. "Miss Porter," the marshal greeted her with his usual brusque nod. "Need a word with your hired man here." Rachel moved to stand beside Xavier. "What's this about, Marshal?" One of the strangers stepped forward, a tall man with a silver badge pinned to his vest. "The name's Deputy U.S. Marshal Collins, madam. We're looking for a man named Xavier Hunt in connection with a mining claim dispute in Colorado territory." Xavier set his hammer down carefully. "I'm Xavier Hunt." Collins nodded, unsurprised. "You're wanted for questioning regarding the collapse at the Silverado mine last year. 6 men died." Rachel felt the blood drain from her face. "There must be some mistake," she protested. "No mistake, madam," Collins replied. "Mr. Hunt here was the safety inspector who signed off on those tunnels a week before they collapsed." Xavier's expression remained composed, though Rachel could see the tension in his shoulders. "I've been expecting this," he said quietly. "But you should know I never signed off on those tunnels as safe. My report specifically noted the insufficient shoring and recommended immediate remediation." "That's not what the company records show," Collins countered. "I imagine they don't," Xavier agreed grimly. "Which is why I kept my own copies of the original reports." He turned to Rachel. "They're in my saddlebags, the leather portfolio." Rachel hurried to retrieve the documents, her mind racing with implications. When she returned, Xavier was explaining something to the deputies with controlled intensity. "Blackburn was a major investor in the Silverado mine," he was saying. "He's the one who pressured the company to ignore my safety recommendations. When the tunnels collapsed, they needed a scapegoat." Collins accepted the portfolio from Rachel, flipping through the papers with a frown. "These look genuine, but they'll need to be verified." "Of course," Xavier agreed. "I'll cooperate fully, but you should also know that Blackburn has followed me here. He's trying to acquire Miss Porter's land because he's found silver again, and he doesn't want his past mistakes coming to light." The marshal and deputies exchanged glances. "That's a serious accusation, Hunt," Marshal Wilcox said. "It's the truth," Rachel interjected. "Blackburn has been pressuring me to sell for months. When I refused, my barn mysteriously caught fire." Collins studied her thoughtfully. "Do you have proof of that, Miss Porter?" "Only circumstantial evidence," she admitted. but Mr. Hunt can confirm that Blackburn recognized him in town yesterday. The man practically turned white. I'll need to take you in for questioning, Hunt, Collins decided. But I give you my word, we'll investigate your claims thoroughly. Xavier nodded, resigned. I understand. He turned to Rachel, his eyes conveying what words couldn't in front of the lawman. I'm sorry to leave you in the lurch with the barn half finished. Rachel found her voice despite the fear clutching at her throat. Don't worry about the barn, just clear your name. As the men prepared to depart, Rachel impulsively grabbed Xavier's arm. Wait! She hurried inside, returning moments later with her father's pocket watch. Take this, she said, pressing it into Xavier's hand. For luck. And so, you remember you have a reason to come back. Xavier's fingers closed around the watch, his eyes never leaving hers. I will come back, Rachel. That's a promise. The days following Xavier's departure were the longest of Rachel's life. She threw herself into working on the barn, determined to make progress despite being alone once more. News traveled fast in small communities, and within days everyone knew that her mysterious hired hand was being questioned about a mining disaster in Colorado. A week passed with no word. Rachel visited town twice, seeking information from the marshal, but learned only that Xavier had been taken to Denver for further questioning. The uncertainty ate at her, as did a growing awareness of how much Xavier had come to mean to her in their short time together. One evening, as Rachel sat on her porch mending a torn shirt, the sound of approaching hoofbeats made her heart leap with hope. But it wasn't Xavier who rode into her yard. It was Edmund Blackburn himself, accompanied by two of his men. Rachel set aside her mending and stood, one hand resting near the revolver she now kept constantly at her side. Mr. Blackburn, this is a surprise. Blackburn dismounted with the ease of a much younger man. Miss Porter, I thought it time we spoke directly, without intermediaries. I believe I've made my position quite clear, Rachel replied coolly. Blackburn smiled, the expression never reaching his eyes. Circumstances have changed, my dear. Your friend, Mr. Hunt, won't be returning. The evidence against him is quite damning. A chill ran through Rachel. You would know, since you falsified it. If her accusation surprised him, Blackburn didn't show it. Bold words from a woman in your position. But let's set aside these unpleasant matters. He withdrew an envelope from his coat. I've brought a new offer? Considerably more generous than my previous proposals. Rachel didn't touch the envelope. Not interested. You haven't even looked at the figure. The amount is irrelevant, Mr. Blackburn. This land is not for sale. Blackburn's facade of civility cracked slightly. Don't be a fool, girl. You know what's at stake here. I do, Rachel agreed, which is precisely why I won't sell to you. Anger flashed in Blackburn's eyes. You think you can develop a silver mine on your own? With what expertise? What capital? You can barely keep this ranch afloat. So, he did know about the silver. Rachel maintained her composure despite the confirmation of her fears. I don't recall mentioning silver, Mr. Blackburn. A muscle twitched in Blackburn's jaw. Don't play games with me. Hunt found it, didn't he? Before he was arrested. Mr. Hunt is being questioned, not charged, Rachel corrected. And when he returns, I imagine he'll have quite a story to tell about the Silverado mine and your role in covering up unsafe conditions. Hunt isn't coming back, Blackburn snapped, abandoning all pretense of cordiality. Men like him have unfortunate accidents in custody. Desperate criminals sometimes try to escape or pick fights with the wrong prisoner. Rachel felt cold dread settle in her stomach, but refused to show fear. Is that a threat, Mr. Blackburn? It's a reality, he replied, one you'd be wise to accept. You're alone, Miss Porter. No one is coming to save you or this worthless piece of land. I've been alone before, Rachel said steadily. It doesn't frighten me. Blackburn studied her with calculated assessment. Everyone has their breaking point. I'll find yours. He remounted his horse. My offer remains open until noon tomorrow. After that, I cannot guarantee your continued safety on this property. After Blackburn departed, Rachel allowed herself a moment of genuine fear. The threat had been unmistakable, and she had no illusions about what Blackburn was capable of. Yet beneath the fear burned a deeper emotion, worry for Xavier and what might be happening to him if Blackburn's ominous implications held any truth. Rachel spent a restless night, alternating between planning her defense of the ranch and praying for Xavier's safety. By dawn, she had reached a decision. After feeding the animals, she saddled her mare and rode into town, heading straight for the telegraph office. The operator, a thin man with spectacles perched on his nose, looked up in surprise as Rachel entered. "Miss Porter, unusual to see you in town so early." "I need to send a telegram to the U.S. Marshal's office in Denver," Rachel announced, placing coins on the counter. "It's urgent." She composed her message carefully, aware that every word cost money she could ill afford to spend. To Deputy Marshal Collins, stop Xavier Hunt in danger. Stop Blackburn, threatened harm while in custody. Stop have evidence of Blackburn involvement in Silverado. Mine disaster. Stop please ensure Hunt's safety. Stop Rachel Porter. As the operator tapped out her message, Rachel noticed Seth Weller entering the general store across the street. She ducked her head, hoping he hadn't seen her, but luck wasn't with her. By the time she stepped outside, Weller was waiting, leaning against a hitching post with deceptive casualness. "Sending messages, Miss Porter?" he inquired. "Blackburn won't like that." Rachel met his gaze steadily. "Mr. Blackburn's likes and dislikes are of no concern to me." Weller pushed away from the post, moving to block her path to her horse. "Maybe they should be. Boss isn't known for his patience." "Stand aside, Mr. Weller," Rachel said, her hand moving to her revolver. A commotion at the end of the street saved her from having to follow through on her implicit threat. A stagecoach was arriving, unusual for a Tuesday when no regular service was scheduled. Rachel and Weller both turned to watch as the dust-covered vehicle clattered to a stop outside the hotel. The door opened, and Rachel's heart nearly stopped as Xavier Hunt stepped out, followed by Deputy Marshal Collins. Weller cursed under his breath. "That's impossible!" Rachel didn't wait to hear more. She pushed past him and hurried toward Xavier, restraining herself from breaking into an undignified run. As she approached, Xavier spotted her, a smile breaking across his weary face. "Rachel," he said simply, and something in his voice made her breath catch. "You came back," she replied, stopping just short of embracing him in the middle of the street. Collins tipped his hat to her. "Your friend here has been exonerated, Miss Porter. His documentation proved conclusive, and we had corroborating testimony from one of the mine engineers who survived the collapse." Rachel could hardly take her eyes off Xavier long enough to acknowledge the deputy. "I'm very glad to hear it. We've got unfinished business with Edmund Blackburn," Collins continued. "I understand he's in the area." "He visited my ranch yesterday," Rachel confirmed, "made threats about what might happen to Mr. Hunt in custody." Collins' expression hardened. "Did he now? That's very interesting information, Miss Porter. Would you be willing to provide a formal statement to that effect?" "Gladly," Rachel assured him. Xavier stepped closer to her, his voice low. "Are you all right? Did Blackburn threaten you too?" "Nothing I couldn't handle," Rachel said, though the relief of seeing him safe made her feel suddenly lightheaded. Xavier looked unconvinced. "We should get you home. Blackburn won't take this development well." "I just sent a telegram to Denver about his threats," Rachel admitted. "Weller saw me at the telegraph office." Concern flashed across Xavier's face. "Then we definitely need to get you somewhere safe." He turned to Collins. "Deputy, can your men provide protection for Miss Porter while you deal with Blackburn?" "Already arranged," Collins assured them. "Marshal Wilcox is gathering a posse as we speak. We'll escort you both back to the ranch and maintain a presence until Blackburn is in custody." The ride back to Rachel's property was tense but uneventful. Xavier rode beside her, filling her in on the events of the past week, his questioning in Denver, the discovery of additional evidence against Blackburn, and the mining engineer who had come forward to support Xavier's account after years of silence. "Why didn't you tell me the full story?" Rachel asked quietly. "About your connection to Blackburn?" Xavier's expression grew solemn. "I should have. But when I first arrived, I didn't know if I could trust you. And later," he hesitated, "later, I was afraid of how you'd look at me if you knew I'd failed to prevent those deaths." "You tried to warn them," Rachel pointed out. "Not hard enough," Xavier replied. the weight of guilt evident in his voice. "I filed my report and left when they ignored it. I should have done more." Rachel considered this. "And that's why you helped me? Some kind of atonement?" "At first, perhaps," Xavier admitted. "But then I got to know you, Rachel Porter. Your determination, your courage, and it became something else entirely." The warmth in his eyes as he spoke made Rachel's heart flutter in a way she hadn't experienced before. But before she could respond, they crested the final hill overlooking her ranch and froze at the sight that greeted them. Black smoke billowed from the direction of her house. Flames licked at the roof, consuming the home she had worked so hard to rebuild. "No!" Rachel cried, spurring her horse forward. Xavier raced after her, shouting for the deputies to follow. As they thundered into the yard, Rachel could see that the fire had been recently set. The southern wall was still untouched, though the northern side was fully engulfed. Rachel leaped from her horse and ran toward the water pump, grabbing the bucket that still sat beside it. Xavier was right behind her. "Rachel, wait!" he called, but she was already filling the bucket, determination overriding caution. "I'm not losing my home again!" she shouted, rushing toward the burning building. She hurled the water at the flames licking up the wall, knowing even as she did so that it was futile. The fire was spreading too quickly, feeding on the dry wood of the recently repaired structure. Yet she turned back to refill her bucket, refusing to surrender without a fight. As Rachel staggered toward the house with her second bucketful, Xavier caught up to her. His expression was pained but resolute as he gently took the bucket from her trembling hands. "You've done enough. Let me finish it," he said softly. "The house is lost, Rachel. We need to focus on keeping the fire from spreading to the new barn." For a moment, she wanted to argue, to insist that they could still save her home if they just tried harder. But the compassion in Xavier's eyes broke through her desperate denial. He was right. The house was beyond saving. Tears streamed down Rachel's face as she nodded, allowing Xavier to direct her away from the burning structure. Together with the deputies, they formed a bucket line to wet down the area between the house and barn, preventing the flames from jumping to the half-constructed building. As they worked, Marshal Wilcox arrived with his posse, bringing news that Blackburn and Weller had been spotted riding hard for the territorial border. Two of Collins' men immediately set off in pursuit, while the others helped contain the fire. By nightfall, Rachel's house was nothing but smoldering ruins. She stood before the charred remains, emotionally and physically exhausted. Xavier approached quietly, draping a blanket over her shoulders. "I'm so sorry, Rachel," he said gently. She turned to face him, finding unexpected clarity amid her grief. "This was Blackburn's doing." "Yes," Xavier agreed. "His final act of spite." Rachel took a deep breath. "He's taken my barn and now my house. But he hasn't broken me, Xavier. And he hasn't taken what matters most." "Your land," Xavier nodded. "That," Rachel agreed, "and the people I care about." She reached for his hand, entwining her fingers with his. "You came back, just as you promised." Xavier's eyes softened as he looked down at their joined hands. "I'll always come back to you, Rachel Porter, if you'll have me." The simple sincerity in his voice melted something within her that had been frozen for far too long. "I think I would like that very much, Xavier Hunt." Under a canopy of stars, with the embers of her destroyed home still glowing behind them, Rachel leaned forward and pressed her lips to his. It wasn't how she had imagined their first kiss would be surrounded by destruction rather than the comfort of her home, but there was a rightness to it nonetheless. In finding each other, they had both found something worth more than silver or land, a chance to begin anew. 3 days later, Deputy Collins returned with news. Blackburn had been apprehended crossing into Wyoming territory. Documents found among his possessions confirmed his role in falsifying safety records at the Silverado mine and implicated him in multiple instances of land fraud throughout the territory. "He'll face trial in Denver," Collins informed them, as they shared coffee around the campfire that had become their temporary kitchen. "Between your testimony and the evidence we've gathered, he'll likely spend the rest of his life in prison." "What about the men who set the fires?" Rachel asked. "Weller is singing like a canary to save his own skin," Collins replied. "We've got the names of the men who torched your barn and house. They'll be brought to justice too." Xavier, who had been unusually quiet during the exchange, finally spoke. And the silver deposit on Rachel's land? Collins smiled slightly. Officially, my investigation found no evidence of mineral deposits on the Porter property. Just good grazing land that a certain rancher is determined to protect. Relief washed over Rachel. Without official recognition of the silver, there would be no rush of prospectors or mining companies trying to claim her land. "Thank you," she said sincerely. "Don't thank me yet," Collins cautioned. "That silver's still there. Whether it's on record or not, sooner or later, word will get out." "By then, we'll be ready," Xavier said confidently, his hand finding Rachel's. The warmth of his touch banished the evening chill. Over the past days, as they'd salvaged what they could from the ruins and planned the rebuilding, their connection had deepened into something neither had expected to find on the Montana frontier. Xavier's strength complemented Rachel's determination. Her resilience matched his protectiveness. Together, they were forging something stronger than either could have built alone. Later that night, as they sat on the partially completed barn's porch steps, Rachel rested her head against Xavier's shoulder. "What happens now?" she asked softly. "Now," Xavier replied, his arm drawing her closer. "We rebuild. Better than before. The house will take months," Rachel sighed. "Winter will be here before it's finished." "We'll manage," Xavier assured her. "And when spring comes, we'll expand the herd, maybe add some improvements to the water system." Rachel lifted her head to look at him, a smile playing around her lips. "You're talking as if you plan to stay." Xavier's expression grew serious. "I am, if you'll have me. Not just as your hired hand, Rachel, as your partner, in all things." The implication of his words made her breath catch. "Are you proposing to me, Xavier Hunt?" "Inelegantly, perhaps," he admitted with a self-deprecating smile. "But sincerely. I love you, Rachel Porter. I think I have since the moment I saw you fighting that barn fire with nothing but determination and a bucket." Rachel laughed softly, even as tears pricked at her eyes. "That wasn't my finest moment." "It was to me," Xavier insisted. "I saw your courage, your refusal to surrender even when the odds were impossible. How could I not fall in love with such a woman?" Rachel reached up to touch his face, marveling at how this man had come to mean everything to her in such a short time. "Yes," she whispered. "Yes? Yes, I'll have you as my partner. In all things." Rachel leaned forward to seal her answer with a kiss. "I love you too, Xavier Hunt. Enough to build a life with you, right here on this land." The following spring found the Porter Ranch transformed. A new house stood proud where the old one had burned, larger and sturdier than its predecessor. The barn was complete, housing not only Rachel's original horses, but several fine new breeding mares Xavier had selected to strengthen their stock. The cattle herd had grown, incorporating Xavier's keen eye for quality bloodlines. On a perfect May morning, with wildflowers carpeting the meadows and new calves frolicking under a boundless blue sky, Rachel Porter became Rachel Hunt in a simple ceremony beside Hart Spring. Marshal Wilcox officiated, Deputy Collins served as Xavier's best man, and several neighboring ranchers, who had gradually come to respect Rachel's tenacity, attended with their families. As they exchanged vows, Rachel wore her mother's wedding ring, restored from the precious few possessions she had saved from the fire. Xavier placed it on her finger with hands that had rebuilt her world, piece by piece, promising to cherish her all the days of their lives. The silver remained their secret, a resource they agreed to leave untouched until it might truly be needed. Instead, they focused on building their ranch into one of the most prosperous in the territory, known for its exceptional horses, quality beef, and the hard-working couple who ran it as equal partners. 5 years later, Rachel stood on the porch of their home, watching as Xavier taught their 3-year-old son, James, to ride his first pony. Their daughter, Elizabeth, not yet 1, slept peacefully in her cradle beside Rachel, her tiny features a perfect blend of her parents. "Not too fast," Rachel called, though she knew Xavier would sooner cut off his own arm than allow any harm to come to their son. Xavier glanced up with the smile that still made her heart skip a beat. "He's a natural, Rachel, just like his mother." James bounced excitedly in the small saddle. "Look, Mama, I'm riding." "I see you, my brave boy," Rachel replied, her her chest tight with a happiness so complete it sometimes frightened her. Later, with the children asleep and the day's work complete, Rachel and Xavier sat on their porch swing, watching the sunset paint the mountains in shades of gold and purple. His arm around her shoulders, her head resting against his chest, they savored the peaceful moment. "Do you ever think about how differently things might have turned out?" Rachel asked quietly. "If you hadn't come along when my barn was burning?" Xavier's fingers traced lazy patterns on her arm. "Sometimes. But then I remember that some things are meant to be, Rachel. I was always going to find you." Rachel smiled at his certainty. "Even with just a bucket against a raging fire?" "Especially then," Xavier chuckled, "though I still maintain you needed help finishing the job." "Maybe," Rachel conceded, turning to press a kiss against his jaw. "But I'm glad it was you who came along to finish it." As darkness settled over their land they had defended, nurtured, and made truly their own. Rachel Porter. Hunt knew she had found something far more precious than silver in the hills of Montana. She had found home, not just in a place, but in the arms of a man who had seen her strength and loved her for it. And that, she reflected as Xavier's lips found hers in the gathering twilight, was worth more than all the silver in the West.